Coming up next on the Flagship Show on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast, we'll be listening to some of my favorite scores from 2023. This is part one of a three-part series. On the program today, you'll hear music from such composers as Corey Wallace, Blair Mowat, Hans Zimmer, James Newton Howard, Michael Giacchino, Stephen Barton, Freddie Wiedmann, and John Powell. My name is Erik Woods. Thank you very much for tuning in to the Flagship Show here on the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast, which begins now.
On the air and streaming on the web since 1996, this is the Cinematic Sound Radio Network.
And welcome to the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. My name is Erik Woods, the founder and executive producer of this podcast. I'm also a proud member of the International Film Music Critics Association. This podcast is a celebration of everything film, TV, and video game music. There's something in this podcast for everyone, whether you are a film music veteran or a movie music newcomer. I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to give us a listen, and I hope you enjoy the program. Of course, I can't forget our patrons who help make this show possible. If you'd like to join the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast Patreon, then please head over to patreon.com/cinematicsoundradio. But before we jump into this show, which is part one of my favorite scores of 2023, I'd like to offer this disclaimer. It's the same one I recite each and every year during these best of or favorite shows. These are my favorites. They're not your favorites. I'm sure my favorites are very different than yours, but if my favorite or favorites happens to correspond with yours, then you get bonus points in my book. I've also evaluated each of these scores in and out of context, if possible. Scores have to first serve their film, TV show, or game. That, of course, is the primary purpose of media music. However, and this is something that I live by, and it might not be your mantra, but a truly great score also functions as great music away from the film. And I learned that bit of advice from the great Alex North. So, enjoy the commentary and the music. Up first, music from Supercell. It's a grand traditional orchestral film score that came out early in 2023, and it was one of my frontrunners for score of the year. It's a banger. Written for a disaster action-adventure film directed by Herbert James Winterstern from a screenplay that he wrote with Anna Elizabeth James, and stars Skeet Ulrich, Anne Heche, and Alec Baldwin. And well, folks, there are many people around, whether it's in film music message boards or on social media, that say that the traditional film score is dead. And when we talk about traditional film score, we're talking about orchestral scores, emotive film scores, scores with melody, scores that you can remember, scores that are creative, scores that are immersive. And there are so many people out there complaining that these things don't exist anymore. Well, folks, they're not dead. And kudos to director Jamie Winterstern and his composer, Corey Wallace, for wanting to return to that musical aesthetic that they grew up with in the 90s. Corey Wallace's goal from the get-go was simple: sweep audiences away with emotions of wonder, love, death, and adventure, and leave audiences humming a tune as they leave the theater. Corey continues to say that he and the director drew stylistic inspiration from the greats like John Williams, Alan Silvestri, and James Horner, and they weren't shy about it. But what they wanted to do was not just emulate those great composers. They wanted to work extensively within that musical universe, but make sure that the themes and the musical storytelling was unique and specific to this very film. And well, I would love to give these guys a standing ovation, and what a way to open up today's program. As I said, this is one of the frontrunners for my score of the year. This is fabulous music, and it came out really early on in 2023. This is Supercell by Corey Wallace. That was music by Corey Wallace from the film Supercell, and the original soundtrack recording is available on Film Tracks Records. Up next, music from Dr. Jekyll. This is a British Gothic horror film directed by Joe Stevenson and stars Eddie Izzard as the title character. It's an adaptation of the novella Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. And in March of 2022, Hammer Studios acquired the UK distribution rights for this film. So this is a modern Hammer horror film. The composer for the score was Blair Mowat, who understood the true privilege of composing a score for the first in this new line of Hammer horror films. This brand has such a rich musical history, and Mowat was always a fan of the classic scores, particularly written by James Bernard. And what was a true signature of those Bernard scores were the themes, and some of them very playful. So in this case, Mowat wanted to add his own touch to the score, his own signature, if you will. And so what he does in the main theme is that he rhythmically spells out the title Dr. Jekyll in the melody. And many of those Hammer horror film scores did similar things as well. What director Stevenson was actually looking for out of the musical score was something that was bold, gothic, and dramatic, mixing traditional Hammer tropes with a modern sensibility. And that could go a little backwards because sometimes that modern sensibility just takes over everything, and then you're left with kind of this generic derivative score that doesn't go anywhere and nobody really remembers it. Well, here we have a truly expressive film score in the tradition of those Hammer horror film scores, which are just all absolutely magnificent to listen to. And the score was recorded actually in two parts, recorded with two different orchestras, one in Budapest with the Budapest Art Orchestra, as well as the legendary Royal Scottish National Orchestra. And many film music fans will recognize that particular orchestra for performing some of the best film music re-recordings of all time. And by utilizing these two different orchestras, the composer mentioned that it helped emphasize the kind of split personality of the score, switching from sparse, haunting horror to the operatic gothic explosions that you will hear towards the end of the film and the end of the film score. A 30-person choir helped achieve a sense of scale when they needed it, and Jekyll's textural effects were performed by a variety of rare old string instruments, and they evoke a sense of ancient evil and mystery into the film score. I'm extremely enthusiastic about hearing more music from Blair Mowat because this score is just striking and memorable and enjoyable right from the beginning. And As I said, this main theme is actually quite special. Just listen to those rhythms as they spell out the title, Dr. Jekyll. Music from the original motion picture soundtrack to Dr. Jekyll with music by Blair Mowat. And if you actually want to purchase a digital copy of this album, then please head over to Bandcamp and look for Blair Mowat. And it's going for, from what I can see, about £7. And that's not a bad price to pay for a fantastic recent film score.
You're listening to the Flagship Show on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network with your host, Erik Woods.
Up next, we hear music from the granddaddy of all film music, Hans Zimmer, and the Gareth Edwards film, The Creator. This score was composed by Hans Zimmer, had additional music composed by Steve Mazzaro, orchestrations by Oscar Senin, and the orchestra was conducted by Gavin Greenaway. This film is a gigantic science fiction epic, as I said, directed by Gareth Edwards, who wrote the story and co-wrote the screenplay with Chris Weitz. It stars John David Washington, Ken Watanabe, and Allison Janney. Film set in the near future, 15 years after artificial intelligence sets off a nuclear detonation of Los Angeles, which started a war of humans against AI. A former Special Forces agent is recruited to hunt down and kill the creator, who has developed a mysterious weapon with the power to end the war. In July of last year, Edwards confirmed on Twitter that Hans Zimmer was actually hired to write the score. He revealed initially, though, that he planned on having a company specializing in AI-generated music replicate Hans Zimmer's style of music and, I guess, try to write an entire score without the use of any human intervention. Now, Edwards mentioned that the process gave him satisfying results. However, he decided to actually choose Hans Zimmer, the human, instead to write the original score for the film, which was an interesting choice because Edwards had collaborated with some fantastic composers throughout his career, including Michael Giacchino and Alexander Desplat, and many of us thought that one of those two would write the music for this film. And if you're a fan of Hans Zimmer's music and his more ethereal, atmospheric world percussion scores, like Beyond Rangoon, The Lion King, The Power of One, Rain Man, Tears in the Sun, and Thread and Red Line, then this is something that's going to be right up your alley. I think this is a gorgeous score filled with long-lined themes, warm atmospherics, beautiful orchestral tones, and when it comes down to pure emotions, this is probably the best score where Hans Zimmer has pulled at your heartstrings since Interstellar. This is truly beautiful stuff. And again, this one, along with Supercell, was up there as one of my favorite scores of the year and one of the front runners for score of the year, but unfortunately just fell a little short, but it doesn't mean it is not a magnificent score. Here is music from The Creator with music by Hans Zimmer with additional music composed by Steve Mazzaro. And that was music from the creator with music by Hans Zimmer and additional music by Steve Mazzaro. And the original soundtrack recording is available on Hollywood Records. Up next is music based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel, All the Light We Cannot See. This was a groundbreaking limited series that followed the story of Mary Laurie, a blind French girl, and her father, Daniel LeBlanc, who flee German-occupied Paris with a legendary diamond to keep it from falling into the hands of the Nazis. In speaking about his start on All the Light We Cannot See, James Newton Howard mentioned that he had written a couple of themes before he even saw the picture. He was a longtime fan of the novel since its publication in 2014, and Howard was immediately drawn into the story's message of human courage, resilience, and connection. It's a message the composer hopes to translate to the listeners. In establishing the core themes of his score, Howard attempted to stay true to each character's point of view, creating an essentially orchestral score with a significant amount of electronics to add depth and drama. In his main theme, which features a distinctive solo violin, written especially for acclaimed violinist James Ennis, it ultimately became the emotional centerpiece of the score, a piece that carries over from protagonist Mary's youth into her teenage years. Fans of James Newton Howard longing for that kind of sweeping, old-school sounding James Newton Howard score, stuff that we got in the mid to late 90s and into the 2000s, then this is something that you are going to enjoy. It's an absolute treat. It's one of James Newton Howard's best recent scores, and I think you're really going to enjoy the following selections. This is All the Light We Cannot See, with music composed by James Newton Howard. Music from the soundtrack to the Netflix series All the Light We Cannot See, with music composed by James Newton Howard, and the original soundtrack recording is available on Sony Classical.
You're listening to the Flagship Show on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network with your host, Erik Woods.
Up next, some music by Michael Giacchino for the critically acclaimed Society of the Snow, which is directed by J.A. Boyana and based on the Pablo Vierci's 2009 book of the same name, which details the true story of the Uruguayan rugby team's experience in 1972 after Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 crashed into the Andes Mountains. The cast is actually composed of Uruguayan and Argentine actors, most of whom were newcomers. And yes, you've seen this story before, or you've seen this film before. A quite different movie called Alive, released in 1993. Michael Giacchino was quoted in BTLnews.com with Jack Giraud stating the following about his score. Quote, "I didn't want to go big because it was real people. I didn't want to step on that. I didn't need too much more than to support the emotions that were already there, try and get into the heads of the characters, try to feel what they were feeling, and just be there. The thing about music is it can so often be used as a crutch. So many movies have wall-to-wall music, and sometimes it's a movie that benefits from it. So I tried only to be there when we needed it and to feel what they were feeling and be a part of that and not sensationalize it." Giacchino added the following on his own website, and I quote, "I used musical instruments in the score that would just give us enough sense to evoke the place. Uruguayan drums, which represented the heartbeat of the score. The vocals are in Mapuche, an indigenous language of the region. These elements are used throughout to give us the essence of the place. But my real focus was on the emotions of those people who actually experienced this event. I recently had the opportunity to spend time with a few of the survivors, which was such a privilege as they are so mindful of the memories that they still hold over 50 years later, so close to their heart." End quote. It's a very interesting score because it is so bleak for most of its running time, but there is a section of the score where it does come alive, and really, Giacchino pours it on. So there are two cues that I think many people would go back to when listening to this album. It's roughly a 10.5-minute suite, and it features two cues called Found and Home. This is music from Society of the Snow, original score composed by Michael Giacchino. Music from Society of the Snow with music composed by Michael Giacchino, and the original soundtrack recording is available on Quartet Records. Up next, another score that came very close to being one of the scores, actually, I would put this in my top 10 of the year. And it comes from the television series Picard, Star Trek Picard. This is season 3 with music by Stephen Barton and Freddie Wiedmann. Now, I wasn't really a fan of the first 2 seasons of the show. And when I saw that they were kind of rushing to get through to season 3 and they were bringing back the old cast, I thought, this is desperate times. And I mean, how good can this be? This is just going to be one callback after another. It's going to be fan service. There's no way they're going to get into depth with these characters and really give these characters from Star Trek The Next Generation the send-off that they deserve, because Star Trek Nemesis wasn't very good. Neither was Star Trek Insurrection. The kind of Next Generation story had ended on a whimper, and Star Trek Picard wasn't any better. So once I saw the first episode, I thought, wow, well, this is actually turning out quite well. And Stephen Barton's music at times was just this wonderful homage to Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner. I wasn't a big fan of Jeff Russo's music from the first 2 seasons of the series, just quite unmemorable. So when they brought in 2 new composers, they just added this fresh sound to the series, but also tapping into that nostalgia that isn't just straight up fan service, but it just fits within the Star Trek universe and felt like Star Trek music. There were a couple of missteps. The sometimes overly modern sounds of some of the cues just didn't fit well with me. And then there was this odd edit of Jerry Goldsmith's original Star Trek First Contact theme that was edited into Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek The Motion Picture theme for the end credits. It was just really kind of a bizarre edit or arrangement. It just didn't really feel right to me. But the rest of the score really cooks. And there are 2 cues I want to highlight in this suite that, as I said, do what the first 2 seasons of Picard didn't do. And that was make a conscious decision to honor the past. And not just ape themes and insert them willy-nilly into the score, but to understand the history of Star Trek music and what made that music successful and bring that brand recognition to new Star Trek. So composer Stephen Barton and Freddie Wiedmann did this with flying colors in this last season of Star Trek Picard. The 2 cues I want to feature are easily the entire series' score highlights. The first is the launch of the USS Titan, featuring a brilliant cue that is full of Star Trek feature film score goodness. It feels like this loved child of Jerry Goldsmith and James Horner with this brand new theme for this brand new Galaxy-class starship, interpolating quotes of Alex Courage's classic Star Trek motifs and Jerry Goldsmith's gorgeous and glorious Star Trek theme from his Star Trek film scores, and of course, Star Trek The Next Generation. What an absolute amazing sequence. We then jump to the second last episode of the series, where we are offered one of the, I think, greatest surprises in Star Trek history, the return of the USS Enterprise D, which met its untimely demise in Star Trek Generations. I felt that robbed fans of seeing the Enterprise D flying through the rest of the Next Generation series of films. Instead, we got this flat, ugly-looking Enterprise E that, honestly, no one liked. And if you did, come on, you're just kidding yourself, I think, aren't you? Now, in this scene, the crew needs a ship that's not connected to the entire Starfleet mainframe, and the refurbished Enterprise D, salvaged from Meridian 3 where it crashed, is unveiled in its restored beauty. For 6 minutes, we get to see glorious widescreen photography of the ship and its crew falling back in love with her, while Frederick Wiedmann opens up the floodgates with a cue that is amongst one of the best ever composed for any Star Trek series or film. It just oozes in nostalgia with warm, breathtaking performances of Alexander Courage's Star Trek fanfare and Jerry Goldsmith's Star Trek The Motion Picture theme, along with new thematic material. Look, I am not a Trekkie, but I enjoy Star Trek, and I'm a fan of The Next Generation. To see the Enterprise D back in action for one last time is truly a cinematic moment I will never forget. I was sitting right here where I've written down these words and I'm currently speaking into this microphone with tears in my eyes the whole time and just goosebumps covering my body. This could have easily been a cheap member berries moment, but this was showrunner Terry Matalas correcting a grave mistake the producers of Star Trek Generations made and gave us fans of The Next Generation a truly inspiring moment with the Enterprise D that we never, ever got in the Next Generation series of films. The ships in any great science fiction franchise are characters themselves, and I remember being utterly disappointed when the Enterprise D never got its moment to shine the way the original Enterprise did in Star Trek The Motion Picture. Well, in episode 9 of this third season of Star Trek Picard, finally gave us that moment. And Wiedmann, in style, helped bring it home with his deeply emotional music that ramps up in speed during its last 90 seconds with an underlining electronic bass ostinato as the crew takes their place back on the bridge and helps pilot the Enterprise out of space dock and into warp to save the day one last time. A job well done, Freddie Wiedmann, and of course to everybody working on this third season of Star Trek Picard. It is truly the send-off that the Next Generation crew deserved, and the Enterprise D deserved as well. So here now are two cues from this fantastic score. The first one called Leaving Space Dock, written by Stephen Barton, and the other one written by Frederick Wiedmann, appropriately titled Make It So. Music from Stephen Barton and Frederick Wiedmann's brilliant score for Star Trek Picard Season 3. And that was 2 tracks from the album. We just heard Make It So, and we began the suite with Leaving Space Dock, and the original soundtrack recording is available on Lakeshore Records.
You're listening to the Flagship Show on the Cinematic Sound Radio Network with your host, Erik Woods.
Well, we've come to the end of part 1 of our presentation of my favorite scores of 2023. We have a couple more parts remaining, and we have a lot of great music coming up, including selections from Christopher Willis, Gordy Hobb, more music from Stephen Barton, Alexandre Desplat, Christopher Young, Anthony Willis, and a little bit later, we'll hear a whole bunch of great video game music, including music by Pinar Toprak, Neil Acree, Gordy Hobb again. We'll hear music by Evan Call, Naoki Sato, and many more. We will leave you today with music from an animated feature called Migration, which marked the return of composer John Powell to the animation genre. This film was directed by Benjamin Renner and stars the voices of Elizabeth Banks, Keegan-Michael Kay, Danny DeVito, and Kumail Nanjiani. And if I mispronounce that, I apologize. This film follows a family of mallards who try to convince their overprotective father to go on a vacation of a lifetime and attempt to migrate from New England through New York City to Jamaica. As I mentioned, this is John Powell's return to Illumination Animation for the first time since his debut with them on the Lorax, and the score is just quintessential John Powell. Now, John Powell and Renner connected over their love of classical music, and Renner wanted a score that had a level of unusual creativity and fun. Well, who else to turn to than John Powell? He does that in his sleep. The score uses a lot of string instruments and human vocals. Powell tried to emulate 1960s music, in which there were a lot of vocals, and Renner responded positively to that. He also felt that he may have gotten the gig after expressing his admiration of Sergei Prokofiev's Peter and the Wolf to the director. Now, when asked by Dateline about a critical scene involving the evolution of the score from the Duck's journey through New York on their way to Jamaica, Powell mentioned that one of the things he did right at the very beginning was write the theme for the main character, Mac. He crafted that tune that deliberately descended and departed from the unusual hero's theme and intentionally left it unresolved. Conversely, Powell composed a theme for the rest of the family, notably Pam, Mac's wife, which soared and expanded. With this thematic material, he was able to weave them into the fabric of the rest of the score. As the characters travel and Mac's horizons expand, his theme evolves into something bigger, eventually transforming into a hero's tune. Initially, the character resists the hero's mantle, but then gradually embraces it, and that's when the melodies reach their most joyful expression by the time they reach Jamaica. A very thoughtful, energetic, fun, exciting score by John Powell for the animated film Migration. And the original soundtrack recording is available on Backlot Music. And with that, we've come to the end of the program. Thank you very much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed today's show. We'll see you again very soon for parts 2 and 3 of my favorite scores of 2023. And until next time, please take care wherever you are in this world, and happy listening. Thank you for listening to the Cinematic Sound Radio Podcast. I want to thank Tim Burton for providing his voice for all the bumpers you hear throughout the program, and to David Casina for providing Cinematic Sound Radio's theme music. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please email us at cinematicsound@yahoo.com. You can find us on social media on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And wherever you're listening to us today, please take a moment right now to leave us a rating and a review of the podcast. You can get a Cinematic Sound Radio t-shirt at our TeePublic store. You can join our Patreon at patreon.com/cinematicsoundradio. And don't forget to check us out on the web at cinematicsound.net.